Hello there, and welcome to this podcast Envy live behind the scenes recording. Behind the scenes? The way I said that. I know what's going on here. Hang on. There, now I can hear myself now that I'm plugged into the right place. I like to plug my headphones into the computer when I am not recording an episode, like when I'm in classes or in Zoom meetings or things like that, so that I cannot hear myself in my headphones. And then when I am recording, I like to plug my headphones into my audio interface so that I can hear myself and I can self-monitor when I'm recording so I know what it sounds like. And that was what was the problem. I couldn't hear myself. It was all muffled and I thought I sounded weird. So anyways, here we are. This is a behind the scenes of me recording an episode of Podcast Envy. This live stream is an experiment of what it feels like to make my podcasts first as video, something that I have resisted for a very long time, and also what it's like to live stream my podcast episodes. So if you are here and you are watching the stream live, I would love to see your comments in the comments section so that I can potentially respond to them if they're relevant to the thing that I am talking about. If they're not relevant, I'm probably not going to respond unless you're my friend and you're like, hey, Andrea, how's it going? And I might respond, but then I might edit it out of the final episode. See how that works? So if you do have a question or a comment or something that is related to the topic, then that'd be cool to see. So, and in some cases, I noticed that sometimes people are commenting and it's not going through in StreamYard. So I'm not 100% sure about that. I'm still learning things and figuring things out. But anyways, all of that aside, today's episode is going to be a solo. So it's just going to be no guests, nothing fancy, but it is a fancy topic. And the topic for today is your podcast boring? So this might be, it might ruffle a few feathers. Who knows? All right. I am going to pull my notes up here so that I don't get too ranty and off topic. And la la la. Take a sip of water. All right. Here we go. You ready? You nervous? Is your podcast boring? We'll find out. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Kleiner, and I have invited you here today to have a little heart-to-heart conversation. Now, this may be difficult to hear, so sit down, take a deep breath. Your podcast might be a little boring. What? Gasp! There's no way, you say defensively. My podcast can't be boring. I plan out important topics to talk about in advance. We have the most amazing guests on the show. We have an awesome editor and we have listeners. I see the numbers in the podcast stats from my podcast host. How dare you call my podcast boring? Listen, it's nothing personal, but just because you see numbers in the stats in your podcast host does not actually mean that your audience is really listening to each episode all the way through and engaging in a way that moves them to take the desired action. Remember all those calls to action at the ends of your episodes? And certainly it doesn't mean that they love your show so much that they're telling other people about. And it certainly doesn't mean, oh, you may see me in this video. If you're watching the video, you may see me redo things. And that's because as I'm monitoring myself, if I don't like the way it sounds, because I'm going to edit this later for the audio version of the podcast, I may do a retake. And I generally, after I hear something that I don't like, I'll pause and then start it over again in order to give my editor, i.e., me, some space to make a clean edit. So, note for you as a podcaster, if you are recording and you have an editor, whether that editor be yourself or someone else, always great if you mess up or if you make a mistake or if you want to change something about the way that you said something, to take a pause and then continue on. It makes it so much easier to make those edits. Also, while I'm here, Jonas, hi, Jonas. Jonas is actually one of my podcasting students in Chicago in our mentoring program, Power Your Story podcast. And Jonas said, I'm still loving your podcast on YouTube all the time, collecting your videos to which one is popular speech. So count me in. So thanks for the comment, Jonas. That's so fun that you're watching. So Jonas is one of our senior producers at Power Your Story, has been podcasting for a couple of years with me now. And you can actually hear some of Jonas's episodes at Power Your Story podcast.com. All right, back to the episode. But just because you see some numbers on the screen in your podcasting host stats doesn't mean that your audience is really listening to each episode all the way through and engaging in a way that moves them to take the desired action. Remember all those calls to action that you put at the end of your episodes? And it certainly doesn't mean that they love your show so much that they're telling other people in their circle about it in conversation. I'm not saying that you're doing a bad job at podcasting at all. I simply want you to consider a few ways that you could make your show even better, i.e., more effective. And by the way, this episode is going to be part one of what is going to be a two-part explanation, a two-part exploration of exactly how to do that. So let's start by forgetting about being a podcaster, a show host, a thought leader, or even an expert in your field for a moment. I want you to imagine yourself as your listener. When you have, not you, but you, the listener, when you have some free time in your day to consume content, you choose and why? Do you take out your phone, open your podcast app, and look for a show to listen to? Or do you scroll TikTok? Do you turn on Netflix on your TV or YouTube on your computer? Or do you read something? Maybe you're over content for the moment and you really just want to listen to some music. Now, generally speaking, regardless of which answer you gave, you are looking to consume content to either A, learn something new, or B, to be entertained. And the data backs this up. This isn't just me saying like people love to listen to podcasts or consume content in order to learn and be entertained. The data backs this up from Edison Research and the Infinite Dial. In a recent Infinite Dial study, in a recent Infinite Dial study, the reasons reported by survey takers for listening to podcasts in the United States were number one, quote, to learn new things, 74%. Number two, to be entertained, 71%. And then there were other things too, like to stay up to date with the latest topics, to relax, to feel inspired, to escape, for companionship. I would argue that some of those other categories of reasons for listening to podcasts, to relax, to feel inspired, I would say that those are kind of different ways or different byproducts of numbers 1 and 2, to learn new things and to be entertained. So the good news is that at that time, which was a couple of years ago, 26% of Americans who listened to podcasts in the last week, they listened to an average of 8 podcasts throughout the week. And the report also revealed that 22% of podcast fans listen to over 22 hours of podcasts a week. And the same report revealed that 35% listen to more than 10 different shows per month. Got that? It's a lot of numbers. And of course, it is a couple of years old, but I will say, caveat, a lot of this research is somewhat similar year to year. Like some things kind of fluctuate up or down. During the pandemic, for example, people listened to more podcasts than they do right now. There was a little bit of a spike and then it dipped back down. But generally speaking, these statements still hold true, even if actual percentages fluctuate a bit. So let's recap. A percentage of podcasters or a percentage of podcast fans were listening to an average of 8 podcasts, so 8 episodes throughout the week, over 22 hours worth of podcasts a week, which I don't really understand how you could be listening to 22 hours of podcasts if you're only listening to 8 episodes. So that's a little suspicious. But anyways, they're listening to a lot of pod hours per week, and that this could be more than 10 different shows. So not just episodes of the same show, but 10 different shows per month. So that means people are choosing podcasts. It is a medium that has action that people like to turn to do what? To learn new things and to be entertained. In the 2022 study of the Infinite Dial, in fact, it found that overall, podcast listeners, 67% listened to 1 to 5 episodes per week, 16% listened to 6 to 10 episodes, and 17% listened to 11 or more. And that number skews based on certain demographics. And while Netflix or YouTube may be more entertaining for some folks than listening to podcasts, the research also shows that podcasts have an advantage, or rather a few advantages, over something like Netflix or YouTube. And here is that 2019 study showed reasons why podcasts are enjoyable. The prompt was, you enjoy listening to podcasts because ... And the number one response was, quote, do other things while listening, 87%. Number 2, they're portable, 80%. And number 3, you can listen wherever you are, 78%. So the reason why somebody might turn to a podcast over another form of media in order to one, learn something new, and 2, be entertained is because you can do other things while listening to podcasts. They're portable and you can listen wherever you are. So I want you, as the listener, remember we've got our listener podcast listener hat on. I want you to consider what are you doing while you're listening to your favorite podcasts. So if you really are a podcast listener in real life, which I know surprisingly, not all podcast makers are also podcast listeners, but if you are a real podcast listener, if you do actually enjoy listening to podcasts, what are you typically doing while you're listening to those podcasts? And if you're not a regular podcast listener, imagine what you might also doing while you're listening to a podcast. So I can speak from personal experience. What am I doing when I'm listening to a podcast? I might be driving. I might be somewhere in public waiting with obviously earbuds or headphones, not listening to it out loud. I might be doing household chores like cleaning or putting away laundry or doing the dishes or cooking. I might actually be eating and having a meal while I'm listening to podcasts. I might be doing a certain type of work. So some of my admin work or emailing or things like that that don't require me to actually have headphones on and be listening to the episode that I'm working on, or don't involve me actually talking with somebody. I might be listening to a podcast in the background while I'm doing that type of work. I might be listening to podcasts while I'm in bed falling asleep. I might be listening to podcasts while I'm taking a shower or getting ready for the day. There are any number of activities that I might be doing while I am listening to podcasts. So think about what that might be for you as a listener of your show? So, this revelation that people are, in fact, listening to podcasts to do what? Number one, to learn something new. And number two, to be entertained. And that they might be choosing podcasts over other forms of media because why? You can do other things. They can do other things while listening. The podcasts are portable and they can listen wherever they are. This is fantastic news, but it is also equally important to understand why people don't listen to podcasts, to understand why someone might not choose that. And in the research, it showed that almost 50% of non-podcast listeners say that they don't know where to find them. So that's one problem. It's not the problem that we're going to address today. But others reported being overwhelmed by the number and choice of shows out there. Being overwhelmed by the number and choice of shows out there. So if you ever have gone to your podcast app to look for a new podcast to listen to about a certain topic, then you will know that it's sometimes a little bit like shopping through the bargain basement sale to find the thing, to find the hidden gem in the rough, right? To find exactly what it is that you're looking for. And chances are, if you are actively looking for a new podcast to listen to on a particular topic, it is because you want to, one, learn something new about that topic, or two, be entertained, or, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So, how do we make sure that the listener is choosing your show over any other podcast that could teach them the same thing? And I know your content is totally unique. It's different than everyone else's. No one else is teaching what you're teaching or talking about what you're talking about. Except that I promise there are other podcasts that exist covering your same niche. And to the average podcast listener looking in from the outside for a show to listen to about that topic, they may not really know from your cover art or your title or your face or whatever it is, or even your podcast description, what distinguishes your content from another. So, how are we making sure that if they're only listening to 8 episodes per week or 10 shows per month, that your show, your episode is one of those ones that they're going to tune into, that they're actually going to choose to listen to over all of the other shows that are out there. And that's the key. Number one, they're looking for something new to learn, and they're looking to learn something new. And number two, they're looking to be entertained. So, how you make sure that your show is the one that they look forward to showing up in their feed every week, the one that they listen to first when there are 10 new episodes popping up in their feed on Wednesdays, because for some reason, Wednesday seems to be the most popular day for episodes to arrive in a podcast feed. Is it just me, or is it really Wednesdays? I think it might just be me, or it might be true. I don't know. But why is it that they are going to listen to your show first and over and over and over again over anybody else's? That's the key. You're going to combine both reasons, both of the top reasons that somebody listens to a podcast, and that is you are going to teach them something new and you are going to entertain them. Your podcast is going to be both educational and entertaining. And that is what is going to equal an engaging podcast that people want to choose, that they come to over again, and that it isn't boring. We have all heard podcasts that are very educational, that are jam-packed full of great information that you could learn a ton from, but you don't look forward to listening to it. You don't see it in your app and say, "Oh, I can't wait to listen." And you click play immediately before you've even gotten out of bed because it's too boring. It has great information. You should listen to it. You could learn a lot from it, but you're not going to choose it because it's not also entertaining. I mean, think about it right now. Why are you listening to me in this moment over any other podcast that you could be listening to about podcasting? There are dozens of podcasts out there that are about how to podcast better, how to do this with your podcast, how to do that with your podcast. Why are you listening to me right now? Is it because I am giving you a very valuable checklist full of information that you can take with you to make your podcast better? Or is it because I am entertaining you while you are learning something new? See how this works? It is a magical formula. I want to go back to a comment, Jonas, on the live stream. How about everyone can go to Wrigley Field or North Avenue Beach? That those are places that everyone can go. And yeah, this goes back to, what do you imagine that you are doing as a podcast listener while you're listening to podcasts? I can pretty much guarantee that if I was going to hang out at North Avenue Beach, I would have my earbuds with me and my phone, and I would be listening to podcasts. That is, unless it's too hot outside and then my phone overheats and you have to kind of like hide it somewhere shady and let it cool down. That has happened to me before. User beware. But for sure, if you're out about and doing something fun, unless you are having a conversation with somebody else, if you're on your own or if you're just relaxing, of course, you may also be listening to podcasts at that time too. Great suggestion, Jonas. All right, let's take a sip of water. So back to me. We were just talking about why you're listening to Podcast Envy with Andrea Klunder, your podcast boss right now, as opposed to any other podcast you could be listening to about podcasting. Or you could be reading a blog post, or you could be watching a YouTube video. In fact, maybe if you're watching the live stream or the replay of this, maybe you are watching a YouTube video of this, but that's getting a little too meta and it doesn't help my point. Anyways, let's take another example for me. But again, we're going to imagine this time that I am not a professional podcast producer. I am also your free neighborhood super podcast listener. And that is true. I am that. This means, the fact that I'm a super listener means that I listen to way more than 11 episodes of podcasts per week. And I listen to, for sure, more than 10 different episodes, for sure, more than 10 different shows per month. In fact, I follow dozens of different shows in my app, and I don't listen to every episode of every show, but there are some shows that I do listen to every episode of. Any guesses why those shows I listen to every episode of? It's because I always learn something new and I'm always entertained. Also, a third thing that goes in there, which I've talked about in previous episodes, which is that the audio quality is high. And so that removes a barrier to listening, because there are some shows that are very educational and also entertaining. But when the audio quality is poor and there's a barrier to my enjoyment of receiving that education and entertainment, then that is a reason why it goes down the list and it's not the first one I listen to. So that's a side topic, audio quality. But we're talking about educational and entertaining. How to not make your podcast boring. Okay. So, my example of myself, I listen to all podcasts and I also choose to take action based on the podcasts that I listen to. I often choose to work with someone as a result of listening to their podcast. My current business coach right now, Diane Wingert, I chose her partly because she has a great podcast, The Driven Woman Entrepreneur, that I've talked about before. And that is one of the reasons why I am now paying her to coach me in my business. Even though there are tons of great business coaching podcasts out there with lots of information, and there are tons of great business coaches out there who don't have a podcast, I chose Diane partly because she has a podcast. It is educational and it is entertaining, and the audio quality is good. I also love to learn new things through podcasts. In fact, recently I bought my first condo and joined the homeowners associate and joined the HOA board. That's the homeowners association for my condo building. I have no idea how homeowners associations work. I have no idea how to work with a management company. I certainly have no idea how to be the treasurer of a board. And so what did I do? I immediately opened my podcast app and started searching for podcasts for board members for HOAs so that I could learn how to be an effective board member. First of all, there is a dearth of podcasts on this topic. I think I'm using that word properly. First of all, there are not many podcasts on this topic. So if you are someone who can help HOAs become more effective from the owner and the board perspective, not from the property management company perspective, you could be one of very few podcasts in this niche. And also, I will say you have a very good chance of being the best one, because a lot of the shows I did find were boring. Yes, they were. The topics looked good. It looked like what I wanted to learn. But when I started to listen, in some cases, the audio quality was bad. In some cases, the host's voice was kind of monotone and boring. In some cases, it wasn't well edited. In some cases, I don't know. I just like, this feels like research instead of entertainment. And while I do want to learn, I don't want it to feel like hard work. I want it to be fun and entertaining. I did find one podcast that is fun and entertaining. I said was because it's no longer being produced. So I was only listening to back catalog episodes because there are no new episodes. But it was actually entertaining. And I can talk more about that in the second part of this 2-part series on Is Your Podcast Boring? Because there are some really specific reasons why that was the only podcast that I actually listened to multiple episodes of that I found the most useful. So I am always looking for shows, listening to shows for my own personal use and also professionally. I am constantly stumbling across podcasts produced by organizations, companies, and brands that I love. And I get so excited when I see a podcast on behalf of an organization I love. And then I listen to it and it's boring. It's not as good as it could be. And there are a few reasons why, which we're going to get into in part 2. So there is a key in the research, in the data, as to how to make sure that your podcast is entertaining. And that key is that around 3/4 of podcast listeners enjoy a particular podcast, quote, for particular hosts, end quote. For particular hosts. The host is the reason they enjoy the podcast, and not the content, not the data, not the information, not what they learn from it, not the theme music, the host. Now, you may say, whoa, 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 I'm not a celebrity. Fear not. You don't need to be a celebrity in order to be an engaging podcast host. In fact, hot take, most celebrities are not great podcast hosts, but that's another topic for another day. Let's take a look at the sector of personal finance. one of my favorite types of podcasts to listen to. How many personal finance podcasts are out there full of great information where you could learn a ton and become so much more proficient with your personal finances? How many? I don't know. Probably tens, 20s, hundreds maybe of personal finance podcasts. I listen to certain ones. And the reason why I have chosen the ones that I listen to are, want to guess? Because of the host. It's not to do with how long they are. Some are like 20 minutes long on average, some are closer to an hour average. Some have this perspective or that perspective. The reason why I listen to the personal finance podcasts that I choose to listen to is because of the hosts. Now, if you want to do a little reconnaissance yourself and start to see if you can figure out what it is about a particular host or what a great podcast host does to make their show not only educational, but also entertaining, here are 3 of my favorite personal finance podcasts that I listen to almost right away when they come out. Definitely within the first 24 to 48 hours of a new episode, they're at the top of my queue. Money with Katie, So Money with Farnoosh Torabi, and Afford Anything with Paula Pant. So take a listen to those 3 podcasts, Money with Katie, So Money, and Afford Anything, and see if you can figure out before the next episode of Podcast Envy what those hosts are doing that is different from other personal finance hosts. Now, I'm not saying that there are no other personal finance podcasts that are great, because there are some others that are in my queue and they're just not the ones that always rise to the top. They're kind of like a second string. And then there's a ton of personal finance podcasts that I've never even listened to. So if your favorite isn't on that list, please don't be offended. But I would love to see if you could listen to those shows and figure out what it is that you think that they're doing or what it is about those hosts that makes them rise to the top of my queue specifically. And then you will know why I, as an ideal audience member, may be choosing to listen to them. Some hints. All right, I've got 4 hints for you. Relatability, voice, storytelling, humor. I know it sounds like I just gave you the answers, but I didn't. I encourage you to listen to some of their episodes and see how they are using those 4 things and why I picked them out. If you want to make sure that your podcast is not boring, you need it to be both educational and entertaining. You can no longer afford to make it an either or proposition. If you do, you're missing out on engagement, growth, and impact opportunities with your audience. So now that you know the problem and you know the formula, education plus entertainment equals engagement, or put another way, people will choose to listen to your podcast when they can, learn something new, and 2, be entertained. On part 2 of this Podcast Envy series, we are going to explore 1,001 ways to make your podcast more entertaining and make sure it is not boring. Maybe not 1,001, because that would really take a long time, but a bunch of different ways. And then you will be able to sort through that list of ideas and figure out what is going to work best for you, for your personality, your approach, your brand, your style, whatever it is, because you don't have to do it the same ways that I do it or the same ways that Katie from Money with Katie does it, or the same ways that Farnoosh from So Money does it, or whatever. There are different approaches to bringing some entertainment into your podcast, and we're going to explore that in the next episode. Now, if you don't want to wait that long and you're like, this is a problem that needs to be solved right now for my podcast, here are a couple of things that you can do. Number one, let me pull up a banner here, actually. You can sign up for the next Podcast Envy Masterclass. This is a 1-hour class being delivered via Zoom. And this class is all about podcast hosting like a pro. So you are going to get ideas and ways to up-level your hosting skills specifically. And again, listening for a particular podcast host, this is one of the top ways to make sure that your show is more entertaining and is being chosen by listeners above other shows in your niche or in your field. You can sign up for this class at thecreativeimposter.com/masterclasses. All of the details are there. And this one is going to take place on Friday, April 21st at 11:30 a.m. Central Time on Zoom. And we're going to be featuring the fantastic Karen Yates, Wild and Sublime. Wild and Sublime is one of our podcast clients. And Karen has experience not only as a podcast host, but she also has a background in theater, very similar to me, different background, but still the theater. She has experience as an MC for live events, as a presenter, as a director, as a writer, as an actor. She's got it all. And she's going to be bringing her perspective mixed with my perspective on ways that you can bring these skills and improve them in your podcast hosting experience. So again, that's Friday, April 21st at 11:30 a.m. Central, thecreativeimposter.com/masterclasses. And there is a promo code. You can get 50% off your masterclass with the promo code VIP invite. So that's VIP invite for 50% off your masterclass. And if you cannot attend live, you will get a copy of the replay. And if you are there live, you can participate in the live Q&A. And you know what? I'm not mean. I'm really not. So therefore, if you can't attend live and you know that, you can still participate in the Q&A by sending us your questions ahead of time. And Karen and I will see if we can answer them during that class. So that is opportunity number one. And then opportunity number two, if you want personalized support, if you like, oh my God, my podcast might be boring. What do I do? You can engage with me directly for a podcast a refresh. Book a 20-minute complimentary consultation with me to see if that one-on-one service container is a fit for you. What we'll do is we'll take a look, and by we, I mean I will take a look and a listen in depth to your podcast, your brand, what it is you're trying to do. We'll meet, we'll discuss all of your goals and objectives and dreams and vision. I'll get a feel for what your strengths are as a podcast host that we can capitalize that might be underused in your show. And we will create an action plan for you with some coaching and accountability. And that one is here, thecreativeimposter.com T420. That's tea, like the thing that you sip when you're having a casual conversation in the afternoon with someone. Thecreativeimposter.com /TEAFOR20, T for 20, because we're going to have a virtual tea date online for 20 minutes. And I'm not going to do all of that I just said in 20 minutes. No, this call is just a chance for me to get a feel for what you need and what you're working on and where you're stuck. And I can see if it will be good for us to do the Podcast Envy refresh together and if I think I can help you. So that's what that one is for. thecreativeimposter.com/T for 20 to and how we can work together to make sure that your podcast is indeed not boring. All right. I think we've reached the end. We've reached the end of part 1, but it is only the beginning because we want to make sure that no, in fact, your podcast is not boring. Your podcast is the one that people are going to choose when they are looking to, one, learn something new about the topic or the niche that you're in, and two, be entertained. That's coming up on part 2 of this series on Podcast Envy. All right. I want to thank you so much. If you were live, Jonas, thanks for your comments and your ideas. I'm going to see you in about an hour actually for Power Your Story class. You said you can imagine trying to experience like Law and Order, Monsters Camp. Yeah. So looking for ways to make the podcast more entertaining. People want to listen. And that is the trick. Thank you for watching the replay for anybody who is watching. And thank you to everyone who's going to be listening to the audio version, which should be coming out later this week. If you have any comments or any feedback about this episode, if you think that I'm right, or if you think I'm wrong, or if you are curious to learn more, I would appreciate comments on this post, or you can DM me or you always email me, Andrea at thecreativeimposter.com. I do read and respond to my own emails. And so if you send me some feedback and you want to make it public and include your name and your podcast name, I might even read it on the next episode and shout you out. So there you go. That's how you can engage and participate in Podcast Envy. And I thank you so much for being a part of this stream. It's a good thing I decided to make this 2 parts because originally I was going to do everything all in one episode and we're already 42 minutes in and that would have been a very long solo episode. So I broke it up into 2 because I'm thinking about you. What is going to be best for my audience? And a 90-minute long podcast episode about how to not have a boring podcast is probably not the way to go. So there you have it. Thanks once again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.